So what we're going to do now, we're just going to undo the leaf pack and reset it in the press. That didn't work. Cool, so we're going to start off just flexing up the Hilux basically with the sway bar in it. Standard rear leaves, standard rear shocks, and see what we get. Basically we've just got an aftermarket strut, but pretty much a stock front end. Tried to keep the rear as stock as I can just for this test. So we got stock rear leaves. I've had to put big long shackles in just to get the height. I don't think it's going to make much of a difference in terms of flex. It's actually pretty surprising what it got to with stock suspension and the sway bar in. It's got a fair bit of movement in it. Open up a fair bit on this side. Didn't quite get full travel on this side. Still quite a bit of room between the tyre and the guard, but not bad for stock shocks. Actually pretty impressed. Pretty damn good. Oh, we'll take some measurements and yeah, see what the comparison is, see how much we gain out of that. So what I'll do, I'm just going to measure from the rim to the guard on both sides, and we'll just see what we get. So 47 there, $17 there, $27 there. About 53 there. Pretty impressed with how good the rear works. Front's a bit lazy though. Oh, let's write it down and see what we got. So the rear suspension actually wasn't that bad. It had quite a bit of movement in it, I guess because of the weight of the canopy on it, but the front with the sway bar in it, I haven't driven the Ute for probably 4 or 5 years now with the front sway bar in, and night and day off-road. Made probably the biggest difference in terms of just the way the car felt off-road. It was to the point where some of these little tracks I'm driving here in the videos actually felt a little bit scary, because the car just pitched and rolled and picked wheels where it really shouldn't. It was yeah, it's good to compare it back to back. So this is our first flex up with the sway bar in, the rear suspension pretty much standard. Not too bad. The front moves, you know, a little bit with the sway bar in. I think it's mainly because the canopy's on it. It's got a fair bit of weight hanging off it. But yeah, so 20 centimeters of front wheel travel, 36 centimeters of rear suspension travel, which gives us 56 centimeters in total, which isn't too bad in stock form, I guess you can say. But yeah, let's make it a hell of a lot better. Start at the front, and all we're going to do today is just remove the front sway bar. Just going to take these bolts out here that hold the saddle clamp in place. Then we're going to move over to here and remove these two brackets to give us access to get the sway bar out. Then finally, the last step is just to remove these nuts. There's one each side. Then we can drop the sway bar and really get this front end working.
So that's pretty much the front sorted. The only thing I'm going to do today is just take the front sway bar out of it, and you'd be surprised how much of a difference it actually makes off-road. I prefer it in a number of ways. It just makes the whole front end so much easier to work on. There's heaps more room. You can take the strut out if you need to. If you do a CV, it's easy to get to. Bend a tie rod, less stuff to get in the way. Yeah, heaps of benefits for off-roading. Well, that's the front all sorted. Time to move on to the rear. Cool, so I've got the RG leaves out of my ute that I've had in there previously. Basically, just going to pull the centre pin out, mark them up, reset them in the press. That didn't work. Cool, try again. Just going to hold the pin and blow the leaf pack apart. So this is the pack that I've just split apart, the standard leaf pack for an RG Colorado. What I'm going to do now, basically just going to measure every 10 centimetres, just mark it with a paint pen all the way along the top two leaves. Don't have to worry about the load leaf or the lower. And yeah, reset them in the press. We'll see how we go. Cool, so what we're going to do now, before we start resetting anything in the press, we've got to sort of know our baseline where we're at. We don't want to reset it and have no idea where our starting point is. So first of all, just lay the spring on the ground, draw around it so we get a bit of a reference, and then when we start pressing it, at least we can see the form and the arc taking place and realise, you know, what we're doing. So we'll mark it out. Get a pen that works first. Alright, third tie, genuine Sharpie, let's see how this goes. Oh, there you go, look at that. That's better. Cool, so there's our reference point. Basically, when we reset the leaf, we'll see a different arc take place. So we can realise how much to reset it, and then we just compare it as we go along to make sure both sides are the same. Once we're all set up, basically ready to start pressing. So each leaf's always going to be different depending on the actual thickness of the leaf. I find the thinner ones, you probably put about 1.5 tonne into it. The thicker, like the more override leaves, the heavier ones, the packing, sometimes put about 2 tonne of force in it at every interval, and that'll just shape the spring out. Cool, easy as that. You can basically see here where the spring used to be as to where it is now. So it's got a decent set in it now, which will just allow that diff to drop back down and allow the shocks to open up, give you the travel that, that we're chasing. So, one leaf's reset now, basically just going to copy it to the other one, match them up. Cool, and once we got them out of the press, we'll match them up. Make sure they're the same height. If they're not, we can always readjust. One's a little bit taller than the other one, so what I'll do is I'll just add a bit more set to this leaf, get them both to match perfectly. Then I'll move on to the second leaf that sits under the main leaf to get it to match the same. And then we're pretty much ready to put them back together and bolt them into the car. Cool, so I've got the rear leaves out. I'll show you the difference between them. So there's the standard leaves there over the far side. They're actually genuine Toyota leaves. They haven't been touched. Still got the standard wraps on them, haven't been reset or anything, still standard height. And you can see them compared to the RGs that I reset earlier. They're a little bit longer on one end from this eye here, center line, to the actual center bolt. Very, very little difference. It's just a little bit of extra length on the tail section here, which gives you a bit of a kicked up shackle angle, which just allows it to flex better, really. Not a huge, drastic change, but you'd be surprised how much of a difference it actually makes. I'm going to do something a little bit different here too. I'm actually going to split the new leaf pack apart and fit in these leaves over here that I set up earlier. I've had these leaves in it for a couple of years now, just to help with the weight of the canopy. 2 extra leaves either side, and it can carry the 500 kilo canopy quite easily. That's all I found is needed to maintain the height and make it still ride nice. So all I'm going to do is basically separate the pack again, put those extra leaves between the main, I guess you call the override leaf or the load leaf, and just sit them in between this gap in here. It'll just take the extra weight of the canopy and still give me the good ride height, and I'll still get plenty of wheel travel out of it. Now it's time to throw the new leaf pack in. This is always the hardest bit to get everything to line up, because now the spring has so much set on it. Usually the car's got to go up or the axle's got to go down, but we'll make it happen. We'll line it up, and yeah, getting keen to flex this up and see what the difference is. Cool, well now that's the rear spring in. What I'm going to do now is show you something.
I'm not a big fan of these. They're just crap. So what I'm going to do, or what I already have done, drill a hole in the bump stop striker plate up here and get yourself some of these 80 series bump stops. Really simple, just get a bolt. I think it was 12mm by 25 little bolt, and all I've done, you can see there, is just bolt these up into there. Heaps better than the factory mount. Got a lot of squish in them. I've had the ute airborne a couple of times doing silly things. Heaps better than the factory mount. The stock one doesn't really have any give to it. It's quite hard, quite firm. And striking here quite hard, there's a chance of bending the chassis. These at least have a little bit more give in them. A little tip as well, these bolts here have to be done up on the ground. If you don't, it might spin the bush. Just a little tip. But yeah, there's the 80 series bump stop all fitted up. Just a little nut on the top there with a bolt going through it. Yeah, heaps comfier for bottoming out, and you can get a little spacer in here too, so if you're running really long shocks, you don't want your shock bottoming out. I find it's a really good solution to overcoming your long shocks and little small factory bump stops. Anyway, I'll go throw the other leaf spring in then, and yeah, I think it's nearly time to throw some wheels on it and get it under the forklift and go for a wheel. Let's see what the difference it makes. Well, this will give you a bit of an idea of how much the actual spring can open up now. It's happily dropping to 33. Well below the sill. Obviously, shocks aren't hooked up. But here's a bit of an idea of where the shock used to be. How much it's gained just by resetting those leaves and installing longer leaves. Look at that, nowhere near it. You don't realise how short the original shocks are. Far out. Shackles at a huge angle. Obviously, I'm never going to get this much droop out of it because you just get too much axle wrap. This leaf, obviously, is the only thing really keeping the axle from walking around and doing silly things, so it gives you a bit of an idea anyway. Huge amount of drop. What I suggest doing anyway, if you're doing any sort of hard wheeling, use pins in here. This help hold the leaf pack together, stops the axle from walking around and doing silly things. But yeah, that's bloody, I'm pumped with that. Stoked. Look at that. Get your camera to focus. Another thing I forgot to mention earlier, you can actually reroute your handbrake cables. So this one here's still got a little bit of length in it. I'll show you the other side how much better it is. Quite a bit more length on the inside here. Basically, still got heaps left in it. Good little tip as well when you're doing something like this. Watch all your lines, make sure everything's got enough length on it. Brake cable's still got enough. Brake proportional valve adjuster thing is on a stupid angle, and actually the wires for me ABS, diff breather, and oh no, what else goes to diff? Rear diff lock. Wires are like stretched proper well, so obviously this is without shocks on, so with shocks it'll be safe, but something to keep in mind anyway when you're doing this sort of work. So there's a few options. I'm running 210mm shackles. You can actually run 190s, probably a little bit shorter as well, a little bit longer, just depending on your preference and what you want that angle to be at. One thing too that's worth mentioning, when it starts to flex up and gets all crossed up, the body of the shock actually hits on the leaf. So what I've done is I've actually made a spacer to go in between here to bring the body of the shock further towards the centre of the diff, just give it more clearance between the leaf spring and the actual shock body.
Extended brake lines are obviously a must when you're doing any of this sort of work. I just got this set off eBay. Set of braided lines. Noticed the braking was a little bit better too when I installed the braided. Just had a bit better pedal feel overall, a bit more solid. So the rear shocks I'm using are a Bilstein. They're 660mm open length, which I find is enough for what I'm doing. Honestly, you could probably stretch out to about 700 to get the full extent out of it, but I'm happy with where it is at the moment. Seems to have enough travel for what I'm doing. Still get a fair bit of drop travel, nothing like it was before, obviously, but it's a bit more, a bit more respectable now. The Leaf before was all open and that shackle's on a crazy angle, so this makes it a little bit more refined. But I'm going to go run that, flex up on the forklift, and see what we get. Out. Even the rear's tucking harder. Bit of the guard there. Not touching bump stop yet. That's fully tucked into the guard there the way it should. Look at the rear. Whew. Damn. Made a huge amount of difference with the shocks out, surprisingly. They could definitely be a little bit longer, but still got a bloody heap of travel, which is still good. A lot better than what it used to be. Well, there you go, there's the final results. 56 centimeters total to start with, and we ended up with 71, so pretty decent improvement. Got an extra 15 centimeters of travel out of the front and the rear combined. The front started off with 20 centimeters of travel, ended up with 27, which is pretty good. Extra 7 centimeters just by unbolting the sway bar. That's a 5-minute job to get that front working the best it can. The rear obviously saw the most difference out of it. That was yeah, pretty big jump. That's only with the shocks I got there at the moment, the 660mm opens. You can definitely go longer. Yeah, probably in the future too. I might end up looking at going a shock inversion, but we'll see what happens when the time comes, eh? One thing you notice straight away is how smooth it is with the sway bar out. I forgot how pat it was off-road with the sway bar in. It just throws the cab side to side, but at least now it's nice and smooth. Feels more like a 4-drive. Actually feels like the tyres are let down. It's that bad. It was that bad before. I'll have another crack at this hill now. See if I can get up it this time, eh?
might have heard a bit of squeaking during the video. It's just these lower bushes here are flogged out, they're metal on metal. But there's a fix. Stay tuned. Stay tuned. Well, that's it for today. Hope you guys learned a thing or two about the old Lux and how you can get a bit more wheel travel out of them. Yeah. Until next time.